Hello and welcome to episode 47 of the world's first Paul Weller fan podcast. I'm Dan Jennings, and 10 years ago I gave up my live stream and career as a radio presenter with one big regret: never getting to interview my hero, the legendary British musician Paul Weller. This podcast exists purely to solve that issue. Welcome to Desperately Seeking Paul. This week I'm joined by the fabulous trumpet player, performer, arranger, composer, producer, Steve Trigg. And here's a little testimonial from Paul Weller himself, who says Steve Trigg is known as the General, and for a very good reason. He's always got great ideas, has his troops under control, and is always well turned out and looking sharp. His influences and point of reference are varied and not at all rooted in jazz, in my opinion, but in the horns of the great and good soul and funk records of the 70s. But then he in his great section can also play soft and beautiful too. Wonderful, melodic and punchy lines, and for this general, I salute you. Pretty good, right? Not only that, he's played with Mick Jagger, P.P. Arnold, Dr. Roberts, Steve Craddock, Eddie Martin, British mod heroes DC Fontana, and even created one of the longest established and hardest working horn sections in the UK, the Little Big Horns, touring the UK, Europe and the Middle East extensively to this day. Steve arranged and recorded horns on both the On Sunset and Fat Pop LPs, along with the Mother Ethiopia EP, as well as being a key part of the magnificent Stone Foundation since 2016. So let's get into it. Steve Trigg, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Dan.
Now, I'm not sure whether I should call you Steve or the General, as Mr. Weller calls you. Is that right?
Yeah, that kind of Neil Jones came up with that. I got no idea why. I think he was being sarcastic and accusing me of being slightly overbearing and probably a little bit too bossy. But it's kind of stuck, really. I do quite like it, I have to say. You just kind of get used to it.
It's not a bad thing. Yeah, exactly. It's not a bad thing to be called by the mod father, is it? The General. I love it. We'll dig into that.
It's not a bad thing to be called anything.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. So, Steve, let's kick off. Tell me when you first discovered the music of Paul Weller. When would it have been? Can you remember?
Yeah, I can actually. It was, I first saw the Jam live in, I think it was 1980. I was living in a place called Wokingham, which isn't far from Reading, in between Reading and Bracknell. And the Jam were playing, I think they were doing the Sound Effects tour. So they were playing Bracknell Leisure Centre, which a lot of bands did. I think I saw Madness and various other people there as well. So yeah, so I went along to that. I discovered them before that, but that was kind of my first live gig. They were the Piranhas with a support band who had that Tom Hark thing. I think that was all they ever did. It blew me away, really, because I was born in the late 50s. So my kind of real formative years were in the 60s, and having got sort of three elder sisters who were teenagers in the 60s. So I was exposed to all of the music that was kind of popular at the time. So it's really been part of my upbringing and part of who I am. So when the kind of mod revival hit, Quadrophenia came out, and that for me was perfect timing. I just left home. I just managed to get my hands on a scooter for the first time then. And the Jam and a number of other bands at the time came along at exactly the right moment. It captured everything for me. And I think the thing with the Jam was you kind of felt like they were your band. Do you know what I mean? They weren't up there with Genesis and Led Zeppelin and the kind of superstar rockers. Really, they were people that you could aspire to meet, people that you could aspire to be like, and it galvanised a lot of things for a lot of people. So yeah, so in 1980. I saw them at Bracknell Leisure Centre. Then I saw them a number of times after that, Bristol, Guildford, lots of different places. And then eventually I did two of the last three gigs that they did at Wembley.
Wow. Proper fan.
Yeah, I was a bit of a stalker, that has
to be said. And does Paul know this? Have you had this conversation or no?
But yeah, I mean, not to that extent, really. I've never said, "Hi, Paul, I'm a bit of a stalker. Please speak to me." It's quite funny because we were speaking about some of the gigs that they've done, and his usual response is, "Yeah, you tell me, I don't really remember." And somebody will say, "Oh, yeah, you played so and so, didn't you?" And he said, "Oh, yeah, maybe if you say so." It must be a bit of a blur. But I worked with Bad Manners a lot as well. I kind of dep for their main trumpet player, a guy called Colin Graham. And I was talking to Colin about it one night, and it turns out that he was depping for the guy that normally played trumpet with the Jam. So he played the 3 nights at Wembley, and so that was a real kind of link in. I was saying to Paul, I know Colin. And he did think, and he said, "Yeah, he remembered Colin really, really well." So it all kind of comes around in a circle, doesn't it? It's amazing.
It does, doesn't it? It's so funny. So I love how this podcast is into connecting all these different stories as well. It's lovely. So let's take you back to your youth, because obviously we're not just here to talk about Mr. Weller, but your side of it is a professional trumpet player. And this really started. You talk about like the Jam and your formative years. This started at a really young age. What you do for a living now, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd always been musically inclined. When I was at sort of infant school, I started off on the recorder, like I think most infant school kids do. And then I picked up the violin for a while and didn't really get on with that particularly well. And then when I moved to secondary school, they had a brass band. They weren't around because they'd all gone off on tour to Germany on a kind of youth exchange thing. So they had like an extra week off. And I thought, this sounds like it might be a bit of fun. So I joined them. And that took me, by the time I was 13, I was playing in Germany and Holland and Belgium on the brass band kind of tour, which was a fantastic experience. Why my parents ever thought it was a good idea to let me go, I really have no idea. I think I ended up drunk in a gutter in Hanover at the age of about 14 and totally lost in Berlin one night when I wandered off on my own. I was a liability, really. That was fantastic schooling. And then I graduated from that to doing contesting, brass band contesting at what they call championship level, which is like the kind of elite level of brass band contesting. And that was, again, a fantastic experience for me. And it taught you a lot of discipline. So a lot of I guess this is kind of where the general thing comes from as well. A lot of my attitude to playing, to working, to rehearsal comes from that kind of discipline. It comes from that old school. Being professional is not about getting paid. Being professional is about having an attitude. If somebody employs me to do a job, then I will do the best job I can possibly do, and I'll be on time, and I'll have learned what I need to have learned. And that's the way that you get asked back. That's where your repeat business comes from. And then I discovered that I've had this love of jazz music as well. And I kind of learned to play a lot of when I switched to trumpet from cornet, I used to play along to old Louis Armstrong records and just try and emulate what Louis was doing. From that, I got into playing with big bands and swing bands, which were, again, totally different discipline. And it kind of went from there, really. I've fallen into everything quite accidentally. Somebody said to me one day, my dad's managing a band and they need a trumpet player for a horn section. Is that the sort of thing you do? And I've never done any of it at all before in my life at that point. So I said, yes, of course I do that all the time. Where would you like me? When would you like me there? And it's been a kind of a thing ever since, really.
And as a Jam fan then, so as a Jam fan and then a jazz fan, presumably A, the Jam splitting up must have been devastating, but B, the Style Council must have been pretty exciting for you, right?
Oh, no, I went into a complete and utter sulk. The last night at Wembley, I'd gone to say 2 nights on the trot. I'd gone with a mate of mine called Dave, who was too young to drive, and we didn't want to take the scooters up. So he borrowed his brother's, what we used to call the plastic pig, because we all had I had a Reliant van, the same as Del Boy, because you could drive those on a motorbike license. You didn't need to pass your test, but he was only 15 anyway. So he borrowed his brother's. It had no tax, no insurance, no MOT, and the gear stick kept coming out. And so we'd hacked it up to Wembley for 2 nights. And on the last night, which was the third night of the 3 they did there, when they took the final bow and they went off, we both stood there and just kind of stared into space. It was like somebody had died. And I flatly refused to have anything to do with the Style Council out of complete bloody mindedness. I didn't like it. I wasn't going to listen to it. I wasn't going to entertain it. And the fact that a lot of the early Style Council stuff was very, very similar to a lot of the later Jam stuff as well. I mean, it's not that I couldn't have liked the music, but I was having a bit of a hissy fit. So I didn't get into it. So I made up for the error of my ways not too long after that. But yeah, so for a while I wasn't having any of it at all.
Wow. I mean, you're not the only one. There are many, many Jam fans who won't entertain any thought of the Style Council or Paul Weller solo. So
yeah. You see the criticisms of some of the live gigs now, and it's, well, he's not playing any of the early stuff. Well, when you've got a back catalogue which is as impressive as Paul's is, you can play what you want, and he does play a lot of the early stuff as well. But it isn't all about that. Like I said, once I got into the Style Council, there was absolutely no stopping me. It was musically a revelation, I think.
Yeah.
So cool in a good way, and in a kind of hip, that European hip way, that it was just something else really, and yeah, absolutely iconic.
At which point did you forgive Paul? So was it that he became a solo artist and at that point you ventured back in, or?
No, I guess it was around about my favourite shop. When I listened, I thought, actually, this is really very clever stuff, I better stop being a complete arsehole and do myself a favour and dig out some of the rest of it. But I was allowed a little bit of a sulk. That's how important. I've not necessarily had this conversation with Paul, because sometimes it can be a little bit embarrassing, really, to say, do you realise just how important you've been to so many people? You changed a lot of people's lives. And to this day, I think it's still having that kind of impact. That's a major achievement in anybody's book. And there are few people, I think, let alone musically, who can claim to have had that level of influence.
And also to do it through constant iterations. You're right. So it's like, the Jam means so much to so many people, but so does the Style Council to the same people and separate people. And then the solo years as well. I discovered Paul in the early solo years, and from that moment of hearing it's been a massive connection. But before that, the Jam, the Style Council weren't things in my life. I don't, I don't remember anyway. It was that connection. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I remember being dragged in to see Live Aid on the telly, but apart from that, no, it was that connection with that solo stuff, and has been there ever since. And then digging into the back catalogue, the Jam, the Style Council, loving all that as well. Let's talk about Stone Foundation. So this is presumably where you first connect with Paul Weller. So you were working with the band and then became a full-time member. Was that how it worked?
Well, I'd worked with them on and off. I'd stood in on various occasions when whichever trumpet player they had at the time wasn't available. So I'd done a few gigs with them, and I knew the guys because I was in another band in the same kind of area, and everybody knew everybody else, and it was quite a kind of close community, really. So I'd stood in for them a couple of times, and we'd had a conversation about whether or not I wanted to join permanently. They'd lost one trumpet player and were looking for another one. So they said, did I want to come on board at that point? And that was around about the time, I think, when they just toured with the Specials. So they were obviously kind of going places, but I just started a solo project with a singer that I'd been working with previously, and we were writing and recording our own material. So I turned it down at that point. And so they got a different trumpet player in. But I got involved again some years later on. I stood in for the other guy on a session we were doing for Craig Charles with Nolan Porter. God rest his soul. He's only recently departed. But that was just one of those real pinch me moments. And we were in the studio in Manchester in the new sort of TV studios there, recording Fee Fi Fo Fum and all the great songs, and you just look, and this voice like honey is just kind of flowing out of this guy, And when we did If I Could Only Be Sure, it was, I get goosebumps now even thinking about it. But at that point, I was still depping. I was still just standing in for them. But we'd done a couple of gigs on the run up to that where we had two trumpets. It was really quite a nice sound, and I think Neil Sheesby and Neil Jones, both they really liked that kind of sound that it gave us, that lighter, jazzier type feel. So I did a few more. And then when they started to get involved, because they got the call from Paul, and I know Neil's told you the story of the getting the phone call from Paul and thinking it was a practical joke, to say that he really wanted to be involved, and did they want to work on this song that he was working on. And that they'd gone into the studio, and that had started to become the bones of the first album that Paul produced. And at that point, they said to me, look, we want to have a bit of a shake-up. We're moving up a level right the way across the board. We're just about to go into the studio with Paul. Do you want to be involved? Let me think about that for a minute. How much do I have to pay you?
The Jam fan in you is like, oh my God, this, yes.
Yeah. And that was it, really. So I got involved. They'd already recorded a couple of tracks for the first album. So, that was already in the can because we'd recorded some of it, they'd recorded some of it at our place, at our rehearsal place. So we hadn't yet gone into the studio with Paul. So I went along. We got a second trumpet player in. Dave joined us at the same time. I think that was probably just the fact that he contacted them and said he was interested in working with them as well. We needed a sax player, so Rob knew Tony from another band. So Tony came along as well, and it just kind of gelled, really. And then, we trooped off to the studio. But that was 2016, I guess, something like that. And we roped Paul Spear in as well. And Paul has been around the band for years and years and years. He's actually from the same kind of area. He grew up in the same area, I believe. And he'd recorded with them on some of their earlier albums. And he plays baritone and flute. And Paul was an original member of Dexys. So he played on all those, Gino and all the big hits. So we went in as a 4-piece. And it was just, there was no looking back, really. It was everything I wanted in a band. Everywhere I wanted to be, playing, with the people I wanted to be involved in. And they gave me a real free rein on the horn arrangements as well, which wasn't something that had previously happened with the band. But the first sort of few songs we did, they knew what they wanted us to play. But from there on in, I had more and more kind of freedom to work through the horn arrangements and to come up with the horn arrangements that we wanted to work with.
And I said at the beginning, trumpet player, but there's so much more to your armory as the general, in the sense that, yes, you're a performer, but you're also an arranger, composer, producer. And we'll get onto the work that you've done with Paul separately in a sec as well around that arrangement stuff. But there's so many strings to your bow. But it must have been really exciting when not only the album Street Rituals gets an amazing reaction in terms of all the songs and you gigging live, but also you're touring around the world at that point as well, right?
The band had been to Japan a fair number of times before that. My wife didn't speak to me for ages. You're going where for a gig? We did the Blue Note in Tokyo, which was fantastic. And we were 2 days of gigging. We did 2 gigs a day. So we weren't there an incredibly long time. We did gig in the Saturday afternoon, gig Saturday evening, gig Sunday afternoon, and a gig Sunday evening, and then had Monday off and then came home again. And also, so we toured a lot around Europe, Germany, a lot of gigs in Spain. We've got a really, really, really good following in all of those places. And we talked a lot with Neil about the connection with Paul, and Paul really being a massive supporter of the band all the way through and getting involved in bits and bobs in terms of the album, singing on some tracks and things. But I wanted to focus on with you with the Mother Ethiopia EP, which is something that not every Weller fan will be aware of, I'm sure. But you had a big role in that in terms of like arranging the horns, writing and working with Paul on this. So this was a 3-track EP of which the Stone Foundation worked with Paul on one of them. But was that the whole band, or was that specifically? Yeah, it was the whole band. Yeah, Paul had an idea that he wanted to do this sort of. It was kind of, well, you can tell from the title kind of where his brain was, and we had a discussion about what it was going to kind of come out like. People kept saying, well, Fela Kuti. That's where we're kind of going with it. It's that kind of feel. To be honest, I wasn't massively familiar with a lot of his stuff. Really, I mean, I knew of him and I'd heard some of it. So I did what I always do when I'm faced with that kind of challenge, and I soak everything up. I downloaded everything I could find and just put it on continual loop and listen to it and listen to it and listen to it. I do that a lot. It's not about getting ideas, and it's not about saying, well, I can make it sound like that if I copy this bit or I copy that bit. It's about trying to get inside somebody's head and understand where that's coming from. I said, okay, I've got some ideas, and basically, we went into the studio and recorded everything I'd thought of. It was like a stream of consciousness, really. And they said, right, there's all the bits. You go off and make them fit where you want to make them fit. So Paul did that, and he took the bits he liked, and we repeated some bits and edited bits in and out. I haven't been aware of, I think it's Bongo Bob is one of the tracks, and the Kra Collective is the other, which is this London-based Ethiopian 3-piece. But Bongo Bob's a percussion player. Oh, is he? I didn't know that. Oh, yeah. Right. Oh, yes. Oh, right. I didn't realise that. Yeah, that was all us. 2 straight ones of us, and I think the third one is a remix. But yeah, it's all us on there. Right. Oh, right. So you're on all 3 tracks. I hadn't realised that. Okay. Well, I think one of them, the brass is not on all 3, but one of them features very, very heavily with the brass, and the other one's got the brass remixed in. That was fantastic. I bought several copies of that.
Yeah, it's a lovely looking thing as well. The artwork I really like. It's really
it's great.
Yeah, it's really cool. He has a habit of stealing you at times. So the Forest gigs, and I'm trying to think, this is 2019, I think, was it? 2018? I'm trying to remember now. So this was, actually, I think it's the last time Paul performed live outside, right? That wasn't, so we've had the Real Festival Hall since then, but I think it must have been the last time we had a proper outside gig.
Probably. Yeah.
So how did that come about? Because not only, I think the Stone Foundation supported Paul at those, but then he also used the horn section. So were you double shifting?
Yes. He'd used us before. He used us at the Albert Hall for the Teenage Cancer Trust gig. That was a year or so before that. We were kind of added on as an afterthought. The main support was Kelly Jones.
I was there, I remember.
And then basically Paul had said to the guys that, do you want to come and do a kind of support slot? You can only have half an hour, but you can open the evening at the Albert Hall. So we said, yeah, of course, that's absolutely brilliant. And so we were all kind of geared up for doing that. And then Neil phoned me up and he said, I think Paul's going to give you a ring about playing some stuff on his set. And within half an hour, my mobile's gone. And this kind of, this gruff voice at the end said, all right, Trigg, it's Paul. So I found myself somewhere to kind of sit. He said, do you want to come and play, or do you want to do a couple of Star Council tracks with us at the Albert Hall gig? So I said, if you think, it would kind of work out all right. So he said, no, that's brilliant. I like what you did on Mother Ethiopia. Can you come along and do, what did we do? Ever Had It Blue and Ever Changing Moods.
Wow.
So I said, yeah, that's fine. We can do that. It's not a problem. So I said, with the Ever Had It Blue, it's got that really kind of iconic arrangement that Gil Evans did, And he said, yeah, not sure I'm overly keen on that. Can you see if you can come up with something better? I think, hold on a minute, this is Gil Evans we're talking about. Can I come up with something better? Well, I'll have a go, but I'm not making any promises. So we rocked up for the Albert Hall gig. We hadn't had any rehearsals. We just...
None at all?
No. I'd run through it with the 4-piece section. We'd done it ourselves, but we'd not rehearsed with the band. The first time we'd played with the band was in a sound check. So we did that, and that was a mind-blowing experience just to play at the Albert Hall, but also, in our own right, it was fantastic. To play on Paul's set as well was tremendous.
And how were you feeling? So obviously there's a mixture of excitement and sheer terror, presumably.
Oh, absolutely terrified. Yeah. I mean, I know a lot of people say they get really nervous before a gig. And I know Paul says exactly the same. He still gets nervous, before he goes on. And I don't. That's not because I'm overly confident or cocky. I guess it's just the way it is. I wasn't nervous about the playing, and I wasn't nervous about playing in front of that many people. But you don't want to go cocking up on an occasion like that, really. So yeah, you are very careful to make sure you're on the top of your game. And we'd already done our set. Then Kelly Jones had done his set, and then Paul had done part of his set. And I think he just had Ronnie Wood and Kelly Jones on singing an Old Faces song. So yeah, we were slightly anxious, but then once it's over, the adrenaline is absolutely fantastic. And I came off stage, and I'd gone into the backstage bar by the dressing rooms. And there was a security guy on the door, and he stopped me as I'm about to go into the bar to get a drink. He said, "Oh, you're from Stone Foundation, aren't you?" And of course, my chest is sort of puffed up a little bit. And yeah, he said, "You're banned.
Oh,
you're not allowed in the bar. Your lot have been here and emptied the fridge twice. Sling your hook." You do know this is a charity, don't you? All right. Yeah, so we actually got barred from the bar. But off the back of that, when we landed the support slot for the summer tour, which was obviously the first big piece of news, and we were really, really excited to be doing that. And then Paul had said, he'd phoned me up and said, do you want to come and play a few things with us on that as well? And I said, yeah, fantastic. What do you want us to do? And he'd started off by sending me some songs to play that we never ended up doing. I can't remember what they were now, but there was a couple of Star Council ones and some odd bits and pieces that had horns on that we ended up not playing on. It kind of got more and more as we went through. And if she just phoned me up, so I've just added another one on, I want you to do this. So we did Holy Man, Peacock Suit, Start, and Precious into Move On Up, which was the last number before they came back on and did the encore. So that was brilliant. I mean, there's no horns in Peacock Suit. So I had to come up with something for that. He had a couple of ideas and I had a couple of ideas and we bounced that around. Obviously, Precious has got the fantastic horn line in it, and we segued it into Move On Up as well. So that was kind of perfect. I had to come up with some additional horn lines for Start as well, because there's only that kind of one bit towards the end of the single. So I came up with some extra little bits for that as well. Yeah, so we were double shifting. So we did our slot, and then while everybody else was off celebrating and having a few drinks, we were getting ready to go back on and do the slot at the end of Paul's set. Did you go to any of those?
I went to the Thetford ones, the one in Kent, yeah.
The rush to get out at the end is just a complete bottleneck. So we came off stage after we'd finished our last number, which was Move On Up. Paul's gone back out to do the encore, and we've got the length of time that he does an encore to pack our kit up, get it in the car, and trying to get out before the rest of the traffic started clogging all the roads up. So.
They were lovely gigs, I have to say, and I don't know if the weather was brilliant for all of them, but certainly in Kent, it was a lovely blue sky, beautiful day.
The first night we were at Tetbury, the Arboretum, Westonbirt Arboretum, which is just down the road from where I live. So that was the local gig for me. And it had been raining for days and days before that. But the sun came out for the gig in the evening, and then that stayed with us for the rest of the tour. And we did all of those. We also the Horns did Cardiff Castle. In fact, the only one we didn't do was I think they went to Dublin. Stone Foundation didn't go on that one, and the Horns didn't go. Stone Foundation weren't supporting at Cardiff Castle, but we had a night off, so I cheekily asked him whether he fancied us doing that as well. And he said, "Well, if you're free, yeah, come on over and do that." So we did the additional one as well. Miles Kane, I think, was the support for that.
Yeah, it was lovely, and I think hearing some songs that we hadn't heard for a while as well, like Holy Man, you mentioned there, off of Wildwood, Strange Museum, but even Precious I hadn't heard for a while live as well. And you hear these songs and you're like, oh my, I mean, how he selects a set list, I do not know.
Oh, no idea. No idea. And I know they see, we were supposed to rehearse for that. And he phoned me up and he said, look, we've got 3 days of rehearsal at the barn. I think there were 2 days of rehearsal where they were going to a production rehearsal where they've got all the stage sort of set up as it would be on the night. He said, why don't you come along to, I don't know, the Wednesday or whatever it was. So I said, yeah, that's fine. We can do that. I've got all the arrangements. Everything's sorted. We'll be there. And then he phoned me the day before. He said, I've cocked up. We're not actually doing anything on the Wednesday night. And so we're not going to get a rehearsal in. So he said, don't worry. Before we go on stage at Westonbirt, we will just get together and make sure everything's all right. I said, okay, fine, all right. So we picked stuff at Westonbirt, and there's a really great picture that Andy Croft took, which is in his book, of the three horns with Paul on an acoustic guitar in the tent behind stage at Westonbirt. So we said, okay, I'll run through it and, you play along. And we started on, I think that might have been Holy Man, which he normally plays on piano, I think. And so he's got his acoustic guitar. So we started running through the horns on that. And he said, I don't know the chords on the guitar. I said, I've only ever played it on the piano. He said, this is going to be all right, Trigg, isn't it? So I said, yeah, honestly, trust me, Paul, it will be absolutely fine. He said, you're not going to let me down, are you? I said, no, trust me, it will be perfect. And he said,
hold on, he's the one who doesn't know the chords, though, isn't he? It's more the other way around.
I think he said he knew them on the piano, but he wasn't sure where they were on the guitar.
Brilliant.
So again, as I'd done all my career, I was blagging it. Yeah, I said, yeah, it will be perfect, Paul. Honestly, trust us.
Man, that is remarkable. Wow, that's incredible. But I mean, it shows the faith that he has in you and your horn section there, doesn't it?
That boy's a fool.
What an idiot. Or he doesn't care one way or the other.
He never learns.
But he obviously loves working with you, because there's a credit for you. I've got the lovely, beautiful vinyl up there of On Sunset. You and Phil Veacock credited for brass arrangements. And you're mainly, it's the main 2 tracks, More and Old Father Tyme, which are your work. Is that right?
Yeah, we were a bit of an afterthought on it. Which I appreciate. I mean, Phil is a fantastic player and a great arranger. And, I know a couple of the other guys that he had in the section. We're talking top horn players here. Johnny Thurkle. I mean, if you've got any album from the 70s of Jamiroquai, and almost anybody you can think of from the 70s, you look at the horn credits, John's on all of them. He's Level 42, he was their main guy, and he's on loads and loads of great people. So they did, as they had done previously, the bulk of the album. And then I think Paul had just 2 extra tracks that he wanted to do. They'd been in, done their bit and gone. And this was some weeks or so after that he had 2 more tracks. I like to think he trusted enough of what we'd done to know we were going to be able to do it. I'm tempted to think we were probably slightly cheaper than getting the other guys back in. But who knows, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible album, isn't it? And I mean, those two tracks stand out for me as well. I love both of those so much. But
I think it's a fantastic album, yeah.
What did it feel like then to kind of have your name on a Weller album and be part of that?
You can't buy it, can you? I was going around the house showing the kids who were, you're never quite sure how impressed kids are with things their parents do. But look, you see that? Yeah, it kind of blew me away, really. I mean, and he's so sort of generous with his credits as well. You get some people that you just say, you'd have got a kind of very brief mention, but we were mentioned on there several times. Yeah, it's a privilege. It's still a pinch me moment. I was saying to somebody else, the first time we went in the studio when we were doing Street Rituals and Paul was there, I've always had tried to have this attitude of, I'm there because I'm good enough to be there. So I don't need to apologize to anybody for it. And I know that sounds big-headed, but you have to have that mindset, because if you start letting any self-doubt creep in, then that's when you start to make mistakes. I did a session for Mick Jagger on one of his solo albums quite a few years ago and wasn't expecting Jagger to be there. We were in an Olympic studio in London. And when he walked in, it does take the wind out your sails a little bit. But I thought, I'll ask for his autograph if he asks for my autograph, but if he doesn't, I'm not going to bother. And I've taken that attitude with me, really. And it's the same, with Paul. Paul's just Paul. He's got no airs and graces. He's not pretentious. He's not the great rock star. He's busy making you a cup of tea or taking a run down to the chip shop to get some food, the same as everybody else does. But you find yourself just having a sneaky look over your shoulder and think, fuck, that's Paul Weller. You can't help yourself. It gets easier with time, slightly, but not always.
No, I bet. You mentioned Mick Jagger. I mean, others you've worked with: Steve Winwood, Ruby Turner, Jim Capaldi, Robert Plant. You also play in horn section alongside Pee Wee Ellis. So Pee Wee Ellis was James Brown and for ages, ages Van Morrison's music director and arranger as well for God knows how long. That must have been pretty cool.
Oh, that was amazing. I'd been part of, and I still am part of, a horn section called the Little Big Horns, and we've been working as a kind of separate unit on and off for donkey's years now. We don't do a lot together anymore. Everybody's gone off and doing their own thing, but we have in the past been really, really active. And we were working with a blues guitarist from Bristol, a guy called Eddie Martin, who's a fantastic blues guitarist, fantastic blues band. And Eddie lives not far outside of Bristol, and Pee Wee lives like a stone's throw from Eddie down in the south. And so he got Pee Wee to play on his latest album, and we're recording it in like the old-fashioned way of everybody being in the same room at the same time with just a handful of mics. And so we were all there recording that. And Pee Wee had done some horn arrangements for that as well, which we were lucky enough to record. Was recording alongside Pee Wee was fantastic. And to watch him soloing as well, he had to sit down a lot of the time. He's not the youngest guy, but he only ever does 3 takes. If you don't have it in 3 takes, you ain't getting it at all,
One of my very first gigs in radio was I did work experience and was like a junior producer at the BBC in Bristol, so not far from the neck of the woods. And one of the shows I was producing, the John Turner show, God rest his soul, is no longer with us. He was a lovely guy. But
is he not? No, I used to listen to John Turner.
Oh, he's fabulous, wasn't he? He was a lovely. Pee Wee Ellis was one of the guests one day. We had him on. I could not understand a word that Pee Wee was saying, because everything he said. It's all, or it's like he talks like the guy out of Police Academy. He talks like you would expect him to play an instrument. It was fascinating. Yeah. He was what a character. I have to say,
the history in the room. You just struck by the legacy that's kind of standing in front of you.
Yeah.
I was, again, with Eddie, we were lucky enough to work with Dick Hextall-Smith. Dick was the sax player, the go-to sax player in the 60s. So he was with John Mayall and Colosseum and all of those bands that were in that British R&B beat boom in the early 60s. Dick was the man. He was absolutely fantastic. Yeah, I've been really lucky to play with some really inspiring people.
Yeah, in fact. There's another BBC Radio Bristol connection between myself and you. I don't know if you know what it is.
No, go on.
Mr. Mike Darbo. So Mike Darbo was... You played on an album of his, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Mike was, again, because Mike was living not far from here. I think he's living mainly in the States now. But he lives in Gloucester, and he had a show on BBC Radio Gloucester for quite a long time as well. And he was touring with the Manfreds, and he's being sort of berated, I think, by the rest of the band because everybody else had a solo CD on the merch stand apart from apart from Mike. So he was recording in a little studio in Stroud, DB Studios in Stroud. He did his solo album there. And well, that was fantastic as well. What a nice guy.
Yeah, he was incredible. So, I mean, not only a brilliant songwriter, so things like Handbags and Glad Rags and Build Me Up Buttercup and things like that.
Yeah.
Just
and A Finger of Fudge as well. He wrote that.
Did not know that.
Did you not? Yeah, no,
I did not know that. But he was wonderful. So, very quick story. He did the evening show on BBC Radio Bristol, right? And we were like his little tech ops. We were only like, supposed to be like 17, something like that. And there was a bit where there was a guy who'd come in and he had these big reel-to-reel tapes. He'd present this film review, which was about half an hour, 45 minutes long. And he'd give it to Mike, and Mike would play it during his show. And at that point, Mike would go off to the BBC bar, have a couple of drinks while this 45-minute kind of cinema review's playing. And it's our job to put it on, start it off. He'd be in the BBC bar listening to it. And then at the point where it came to a certain bit, he'd know he needs to shuffle back to do his radio show again. It's hilarious, right? So one time we put it on, and it starts off, he goes off to the BBC bar. We'd copied it and we had it on another reel-to-reel machine, and we skipped it to the end. And he's half a drink through, and suddenly it goes, and that's the end of Friday film news for this week. And suddenly Mike's like, oh, he's over the BBC bar. I have to leg it back. It was a hilarious person. But no, another lovely guy. A couple more questions for you before we go. Fat Pop Volume 1 is just around the corner. By the time this podcast is out, it might be in the shops already. Have you had anything to do with it? What do you know?
Yeah, we've clearly done a reasonably good job on Sunset, because he asked us back to do the brass for Fat Pop. And I've not spoken to Phil, actually. I hope he's not too upset, because we did all of it this time.
Sorry, Phil.
It was fantastic. There's probably less brass on it, less what I would call traditional brass on it. And Paul and Stan, who was producing it, had much more of an idea, I think, of what they wanted. So he would send me the sort of demo track with a few ideas and say, right, this is kind of what we want. Can you work something up? We did that, credited with the arranging and the horns on that as well. Again, the same, the 4-piece.
Wow.
So we did True, Glad Times Were On, Moving Canvas, Still Glides. So those are the 4 kind of tracks from the main album that we did. And then there's a thing called Fat Mix on there as well, which is a 16-minute long journey into I don't know where. He said he wanted to do a 16-minute track because it was his 16th studio album.
Nice. Okay.
That was the rationale. The brief was, right, there's no key, there's no time signature, there's no backing track. Just go and play some shit. Do you want us to all play together as a section? No, just go and play. So all 4 of us were just in the studio, freeforming. So we recorded loads of stuff and then took it away with Stan to take the bits they wanted and to drop them into the places that they wanted them to be. Very difficult to describe exactly what it's like. It'd be interesting to see what reaction it gets.
That way of working is remarkable, because I think it kind of seemed like, to me, it kicked off very much with a bit of like Wake Up the Nation sonic kicks around that time of that way of working. And you mentioned like him doing that similar approach on the Ethiopia EP in terms of that cut and paste thing is so interesting in terms of how he works now. Not on every track, when the track lends itself to it, it's just like building up layers all the time is lovely.
Yeah, and it's been a really interesting experience to watch or to hear how some of the tracks have evolved, because I've been lucky enough to get the early stage demos. They're quite kind of skeletal. It's almost like watching an artist, I mean, like Van Gogh or somebody layering things up to create an image that they've got internally, but also being able to move where their kind of target and their goal is. And so as a thing develops, it takes on a life of its own, and things that you thought you might want to do, you're no longer going to do, and new ideas kind of lend themselves to the way it's developing. There'll be a track and there'll just be like 2 or 3 little guitar notes that weren't on there previously. All of a sudden, it changes it. It makes it different. It transcends where it was. And you wonder what sort of brain, what sort of mind listens to that and goes, well, that just needs 3 notes. Whereas, your average kind of punter's going to go, I've written the song, that's how the song goes. Or I might want a second guitar part on it somewhere, or maybe we can add some keyboards. But it's the addition of those almost fine little brushstrokes. If you listen to the songs and the way they're constructed, and they're so intricate yet so simple. Yeah, you're watching a genius at work. And I don't use that very, very widely to describe an awful lot of people. But yeah, it's a fantastic to watch and fantastic to see those things develop.
It's also a confidence, isn't it? Because I think it would be very easy for that to become a complete car crash of noise that just doesn't work. But this kind of layering and how those brushstrokes and how you put it, it's a beautiful way of describing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say with music is a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And the way you go about composing or creating music is different for different people. I always think when somebody gives me a song that says this needs horns on it, they may not be right. And I'll listen to stuff and go, it doesn't need horns on it. It's fine as it is. But if it does want some horns on it, it's not for me to add a horn arrangement. It's for me to release the horn arrangement that's already in the song.
Nice. This is why you're the general, man. This is an education, I have to say. I love it. 2 final questions before you go, and I've loved every second of this. Thank you so much, man. You're allowed one Paul Weller song for the rest of your life. It can be the Jam, the Style Council, or solo. Which one's it going to be?
Ooh, I think I would go. One of my early favourites would probably be Butterfly Collector. And that's not to say it's the best thing he's ever done or anybody else's favourite, but it meant a lot to me at the time because it was about that. And this isn't about me saying, the Jam were great and everything after it. It's been nowhere near as good. But it's that particular song for me was really important. So I guess if I had to pick one, that would be the one. Final question before you go. So the purpose of this podcast is not only to talk to lovely people like yourselves, but it's to get that final interview with Paul, the end of the series, the interview with Paul that I never managed to get throughout my entire radio career. If it happens, when it happens, what should I talk to him about? Is there a question that I really should ask him? Well, don't talk to him about football. Because there's a Chelsea flag at Blackburn, but presumably he's not into the footy, is he? There is a Chelsea flag at Blackburn, and that is Paul's club. That's who he supports. Okay. Well, I'm a Chelsea fan, so, Chelsea are my second club. I'm a Bristol Rovers fan, first and foremost. But, when you grow up in a town where your club is playing in the lower divisions when you're a kid, you always pick up what was a first division club. So I picked Chelsea. I don't know. It's difficult, isn't it? Because he's been asked everything by everybody ever. If you really wanted to kind of inspire conversation with him, it's about new music, I think. He's constantly discovering stuff and he's constantly sending stuff around to people and saying, have you heard this? Have you heard this? Don't know where he gets half of it from, but I know the guys as well will always send him something when something new comes onto our kind of radar. Other people have mentioned, and we've talked about that. Every time I read an interview with Paul, he's recommending something that then takes you off down a little alley into whether it's today I just bought some tour tickets for Villagers, which was something I discovered through Paul. God, I'm trying to think now, maybe 10 years ago, a bit longer. Yeah. Declan O'Rourke, again, actually got tour tickets for him today as well. It was discovered through Paul. Right. Tony, our sax player, plays on that album as well. On Arrivals. It's a lovely album from Declan. I have to say, it's brilliant. It's really cool. But yeah, he's always introduced. I don't know where does he find all this stuff from? I don't know. It's not like the radio's introducing him to it these days. So where does he get it from? I don't know. It must be. People send him stuff all the time, but he listens to music. I know well-known musicians who don't actually listen to a lot of music other than what they're working on themselves. But Paul does, and he listens to a lot of music by a lot of people. He's constantly discovering stuff as well that other people have been into for some time. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying this, but historically he was never a big Bowie fan. It's difficult to know with Paul because a lot of the things that he said when he was younger were off the cuff, sometimes for effect. But he certainly wasn't into a lot of the kind of that whole glam rock stuff at the time. So I don't think Bowie wasn't particularly on his radar in the early days, but it certainly is now, and you can hear a lot of Bowie influences in a lot of the newer material, which is great, really. This has been so lovely. I have to say, Trigg, Steve, the General, I'm not sure what we ended up in deciding, but this has been absolutely a joy to spend time with you and hear these stories. So thanks so much for your time, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. My thanks once again to the General, Steve Trigg. What an absolute blast. And do check out Stone Foundation's new single, Echoes of Joy, which was released this very week. Next up on the Paul Weller Fan Podcast, radio broadcaster, nay legend, Peter Gordon. Born in Guildford, PG has ruled the Surrey airways for over 25 years, interviewing local boy Paul Weller on plenty of occasions too. We'll hear about his favourite gigs, chats with Paul, Bruce and Rick, and about the unveiling of Woking's tribute to the Jam back in 2012 that PG was lucky enough to be MC for. If you enjoy this podcast, then please share on social media. You can also buy me a coffee and leave a review. Find out more in my show notes.
Get in touch on Twitter at WellerFanPod or on Instagram and Facebook. It's Paul Weller Fan Podcast. I'll see you next time.